Good evening. My name is Neil Astley, editor of Bloodaxe Books, and you're very welcome to our first online launch event of the autumn, which features Emilie Jelinek, Clare Pollard, and Jessica Traynor. We're going to start off with Emilie Jelinek, who won the Mslexia Women's Poetry Pamphlet competition last year, judged by MTS Darker. And this is her collection. It's her second pamphlet. And it's called The Sky Around My Father. And a lot of the poems relate to her difficult relationship with her father growing up in Czechoslovakia and coming to England. So would you please welcome Emilie Jelinek, who is in Bath tonight.
Thanks very much, Neil. Before I start, I just want to say thank you so much to you, Neil, and everyone at Bloodaxe for publishing my poems and for this absolutely beautiful cover by Czech artist Karel Čapek, which I absolutely love, and it's perfect. So thank you very much. And thank you also to Mslexia and to Imtiaz Darker, who judged the Mslexia competition. It's ultimately thanks to you that I'm here this evening. And an absolute honour to be reading here tonight alongside Jessica and Claire, whose incredible collections I've had the privilege of reading. So even though this is a relatively small gathering of poems, in a way I feel I've been writing this book my whole life. And a few minutes isn't quite long enough to cover everything that I think is in it. But what I wanted to do is pull out 2 or 3 threads to illustrate some of the things that felt important to me while I was writing it. So I've chosen the following 3 poems to read in this first part, mainly because I wanted to set the scene. And I'm going to start with a poem called Mother Tongue. And I used as a model for this poem a poem called Table by the Turkish poet Edip Cansever. Mother Tongue. A man cut in half by history walks up a driveway, black brogues buffed to gleaming, unlocks a door he doesn't own. In the hallway of this house where he lives with his wife, 2 sons and daughter, is a table. He places here his briefcase, suit jacket and tie, the smell of a company car, acrylic seats and diesel, a hint of old spice, a keyboard's click. The dreams he still has of making it in the West unravel from his pockets like silk handkerchiefs, along with the echo of a long-distance call. He holds his mother's voice to the light, carefully centers it, arranges the image of her kneading sundials for dumplings, the cadence of his homeland. He puts there the unfamiliar shapes of words on his tongue, the weight of a failing business, bankruptcy's hollow call. The cracks in his marriage he puts there too. The table falters, but there is room on it still for his children, his love for them, his children who can't speak his mother tongue. Right, I'm going to travel a bit further back in time now with the next poem called Pietà. Let's begin now in a far-off land to quarry the farm, scour July for clues. They are everywhere. In the pine wood of a table worn smooth by fistfuls of men, generations of rage spilling out of all of them. There's Grandad, Dida, at the head, slurping his chesnichka, eyes emptied in seconds of their blue like a glass knocked over, pooling a darkness. His voice, thin, tin-like, issues its warnings dialed up in tonal shifts, signaling a rise in agitation. Some small thing my grandmother has dared do or not do. The tipping point is in the quiver of his spoon. He cracks at a sudden 9 on the scale of his moods, voice thundering, exploding the room. Windows rattle, spittle rains down in slanted flecks. The day, now black, is torn in two. He pushes back, slams a fist, storms out, slams the door. He slams the door, washes his hands of it all. I see you, father, the boy you were, waiting for it to recede, heart galloping towards your mother, who kneels to you, arms open wide as a field. The last poem that I'll read for now is a poem called Vltava. And it's one of the poems that I love most in the pamphlet. And there are a couple of things that I want to say about this poem. And the first is that there is actually a factual error in the poem, which is entirely my own. And it was spotted after it went to press. Christine, who is Bloodaxe's publicist, is also a flautist. And she's actually played the piece of music the poem is based on. And she was the one who noticed that I incorrectly used the word crotchet instead of semiquaver when describing the music. And the second thing I just want to say is that Vltava is the name of the river running through the Czech Republic. And it inspired one of the symphonic poems by Czech composer Bedřich Smetana in Má vlast, which means my homeland. And it was a piece of music that meant a great deal to my father. And I remember him wanting to share it with us so often when we were growing up. It was his way of wanting us to learn about our heritage and to love his country as he so ardently did. Vltava. You are the source, rising from a fractured space to seep into a place where tenderness might grow. In this moment, I see you, clear as a bohemian sky in summer, your smile still wide as its sun. We listen to your vinyl records as I dance to the scratch and spin of a folk song, something about cherries, in a chorus of female voices that I, your favorite daughter, do not understand. In this moment, you're still my father. An orchard of sun-warmed notes, the strum of your guitar, the thrill of twist and shout song too loud, and Teresa in her campfire glow. Today, your absence flows steady as the Vltava, its course penned in semiquavers as two flutes begin. A cold stream meets a warm one, their confluence as the strings come in. Music becomes river, river becomes music. A force stirs your spirit's bed, eddies a primal longing, and I see it. The castles, nymphs, woods, and fields of a fairy tale I long for still. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. And I did say at the beginning that about growing up in Czechoslovakia, but I'll have to correct myself. You grew up in Belgium and France. And the poem that your poem was based on, the Edip Jansefer poem, Table, that's published in the Bloodaxe anthology, Being Human. So people might like to check that out if they don't know it. It's a wonderful poem and a great poem to be inspired by. We're now going to have the first set from Clare Pollard, her new collection, Lives of the Female Poets, which features on the cover a sort of Instagram post. The whole cover is an Instagram post, and it's based on an Instagram thing which she sent out when she saw this painting in an exhibition. And the painting is portrait of Henrietta Maria Hill by Angelica Kaufmann, who had an exhibition in London. And she might want to talk about this in the course of the event. This is her sixth collection from Bloodaxe. Her first collection was actually mostly written when she was still at school. So she's been with us quite a while. So this is now Clare Pollard's first set. Clare.
Hey, I've just muted myself. Honestly, while Emily was doing her beautiful reading then, the ice cream van just went around the block twice, which is incredible. So I hope it doesn't circle. It's circling me like a shark. I hope we don't get the jingle again during this set. It's dark. It's September. You know, get lucky, mate. Anyway, thrilled to be here launching my book, and thanks Neil for his fantastic and innovative cover design. So this book's really a book of two halves. About half the poems are me exploring female poets of the past, ones who have been forgotten, diminished, neglected, their work destroyed, but also ones who've really inspired me. And there's famous names in there too, like Emily Bronte and Elizabeth Bishop. The second half of the book is poems more about my life, and as I'm a female poet, I thought I could get away with both under one title, especially as I've been a poet really all my adult life. Anyway, this short set, I'm going to read 3 poems inspired by female poets, and I'll do some of the more personal stuff in the second set. This first one I'm going to read is called Inanna. It's by it's after Enheduanna, who I was shocked to discover when I was researching this book is considered the first recorded poet, the first poet ever, not the first female poet, the first poet. She was a high priestess writing in Sumerian and what would now be Iraq. And she was writing these poems, praise poems, for this goddess, Inanna, who sounds absolutely fierce. And I thought it was incredible that these sort of very first poems we have were by a woman about female power. So this is, like, I would say, a very, very loose translation. I use a lot of images from the original because they're so stunning, but I've switched it so it's in the voice of the goddess herself. Yes, I'm unparalleled. Robed in terrifying radiance, I roar with the roaring storm, my teeth crush stone. I devour corpses like the dog that I am. But also, I'm deep-hearted. Plough my vulva. Arousal and wealth are in my gift. Can I offer you the milk of death? The thing about the mountain is it showed me no respect. It should have rubbed its lips in dust for me, but no. So now I'm playing this game. Setting fire to the forests. I'm locusts. I'm a snake in a crevice, a leopard on a hill, a falcon preying on the gods. Go on, fly away, little flappy bat. Can you fathom me? Of course not. Don't you fucking dare. Birds of sorrow build nests in your hair. I spread exhaustion. This anger is too great to soothe. I'm pushing on the lapis lazuli gate, raising a flood of silt. I'm speeding carnage. I've poured blood in the rivers and you'll drink it. Oh dear, has your honeyed mouth filled with scum? So that's a little taste of how poetry began. A poem for a more famous pair of poets now. Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, who were my teenage crushes, I suppose. And I remember reading about them going for these 3 martini afternoons at the Ritz after Robert Lowell's workshops that they attended together, and discussing poetry and ways to kill themselves, apparently, and drinking martinis and having potato chips. And it sounded to me when I was 16 like the most glamorous thing in the world. But of course, it's also the glamour of self-destruction, I suppose. So in this poem, I'm imagining having martinis with Plath and Sexton. I have actually got a cocktail in my hand. Happy launch day, everyone. This is a Negroni, though, not a martini. But we'll come to those later. 3 martini afternoon. The first in a glass, like a tornado brought to heel. How the olive, with its red heart, makes a dead sea. Children can be trained to mix martinis to deliver to your study, if you wish. I eat the free potato chips, order another looking glass, sip its frigid rim, my piss hole in the snow. It's ritzy at the Ritz, plus basically just vodka neat. A blowtorch at white heat is quite the taste. Clear spirit as in fugue, electroshock. A good martini's always haunted by vermouths bone dry and colourless monoxide. The others, oh, they caught their ride. But stir one more. I've got this thirst, this thirst. And water this time, don't worry. I'm going to read one more in this set, this half. And I've gone a bit husky now. I've never read this one to an audience before. I always read aloud when I'm composing, of course. But I've never read this one to an audience. But I thought I'd test it today. It's called Poetry, and it's after Marianne Moore, who has a very famous poem called Poetry that begins, I too dislike it. So it's riffing off that. And I'll finish for now with this one. Poetry, after Marianne Moore. I too dislike it. What do you hope to obtain from this poem, after all? To be told you're a good girl? That it will be okay? It really won't. Perhaps you wish to admire your own feelings as in a mirror. To hear that the nasturtium's leaves cup their little flowers like hell flames against high wind. Perhaps you read out of desire for light music, cultural clout, to meditate with mindfulness on the golden roses curdling. No, I've got it. A prayer, a spell to utter on breath or in skull, solicit meaning or control. And I, of course, want to make time stand still, or to be a part, to put it generously, of literature's great long conversation. Or somewhere to put this excess of love. Though what does it help the rain? I'm moved by the shining quietness of its multitude swearing I love you as if the rain is a boy that I've chased to an airport. I am embarrassing the rain. The rain would say, shut up, Mum. Or wait, I write to tell you about my recurring dream. I'm curled in a ball in a hole, an animal licking itself, and can smell the earth contract, world shrink to soil on my skin, but the shrinking doesn't stop. It occurs within my edges. It's death, I think, though there's never quite relief, only the ending juddering through me as some beast through a gate. Have you found what you want in this poem yet? Truthfully, I hope you're happy. It's grim, the way I'm never dead and neither are you in this zombie apocalypse called poetry. Don't the golden buds always push back through? Which is to say, the flames. Now put this book down. Step away. The galaxy still on your skin, like a sheet of dirt.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. So that was Clare Pollard with her honeyed mouth filled with scum tonight in London. We're now going to move across to Jessica Traynor in Dublin. And this is her new book, her fourth collection. She published two collections with Daedalus Press in Dublin, and then she's since published two with Bloodaxe, The Pit Lullabies, which is now being followed by New Arcana. It's got an amazing cover by the American comic artist Lisa Stirl that she might want to say something about. And the inspirations of these poems include Tim Burton movies and the tarot and elegizing a dear friend. So please, would you welcome Jessica Traynor?
Thank you so much for the lovely welcome, Neil. And it's just, it's so lovely to hear Emilie's and Claire's poems together. Really, really blown away by them. And I'm delighted to be here sharing these new poems with you. And like everyone else has said, a big thank you to Neil. Because for me in particular, I find that there's some strange alchemy that happens with my work when I get a yes from Neil to the book going ahead, and I'm immediately able to make it 10 times better. So I'm always grateful for the leap of faith that's taken when the work first comes his way. And yes, I was writing a lot with this book about a lot of the pop culture that kind of formed me as I came of age in the late 90s and early 2000s. The Tim Burton movies, the astrology, the goth culture, which seems to be coming back around now. And as it started to come back around in today's pop culture, I lost a very close friend from my teenage years to suicide. And she would have been the person who I shared all of these things with. And I think there's something happens around the time when you're approaching midlife, when you start to reassess all of these things that formed you and look at them in a new light. And this book attempts to do that with a lot of sadness, but hopefully some humor. And I had wanted to use a tarot card that's part of a deck called the Modern Witch Tarot, which you'll find in most good bookshops, designed by Lisa Sterle. But we weren't able to do that, but instead she offered to read the book and designed this cover based on the poems, on her close reading of the poems. So I'm going to kind of treasure this forever because it really reflects the book in such a deep way. And before I rattle through some poems, I think what you need to know is that many of the poems in this book are addressed to my friend who I lost, coincidentally and very sadly, actually on my birthday in 2023. But throughout the book, I address her as Lydia Dietz from the movie Beetlejuice. Mostly because that was a movie that meant a lot to us when we were growing up, but also one that I now, looking at through the eyes of the mother of young daughters, feel very differently about. This first poem is called Lydia. Draw some cards for me wherever you are. I know we don't talk much these days, but I've been thinking about the time you set your college dorm on fire and came to live with us. Now I'm trying your tactics. I set a fire inside myself. It's cleared space and my halls are black lacquered and echoing. The problem is, I don't like the new tenants. Inside me is a great tall house, all clapboard and dead ivy. Why don't you and I play ghosts? Why don't you and I play girls no one can touch? Draw 3 cards for me. Tell me. And this next one is called Bog Virgin, and it's a kind of an answer to the question that I get asked occasionally, which is, what is it like to be an Irish woman poet? And it makes some kind of slightly irreverent mentions of Patrick Kavanagh and also steals some lines from Seamus Heaney, but it's mostly inspired by Pat McCabe's novel The Butcher Boy, and in particular Neil Jordan's film version, in which the part of the Virgin Mary is played by Sinead O'Connor. Bog Virgin. Once I walked the road in a blue dress, and a poet told me I looked like the Virgin Mary. So that was me then, Stella Maris, sitting with him in the seafood restaurant eating chowder, clams and mussels sluicing down my throat. The poet told me I should write from my cunt because Paddy Kavanagh never did, and look what happened to him. Then he took me back to the bog, told me to ignore the little men crawling in apocalyptic clay. Keep your eye trained on the mystic beyond, he said, forcing me onto my knees. And if they hurt you, write your curses onto them till they shrivel like salted slugs. So there I was, kneeling in ditch water, writing hexes and levitating as required, but only when the sun came out, which wasn't often. Today, I'm really here to say the bad world is out there, Lydia, pushing in around us and packing up our lungs. You'd better rub their slurry on your face till you blend in, because right now I can see the devil in you a mile off. Can see it pulling up from within, some great bog leviathan, trailing priests and poets who want to drown us both in its wet centre. And I'm going to finish this little set with a poem called Roger Moore's Swimming Pool, which is partly based on a true story of something that I did when I was a teenager, which was definitely not the worst thing I've ever done, or certainly not the worst thing I did as a teenager, but it might be the most embarrassing, and it took me this long to be able to write about it. Roger Moore's swimming pool. When your mother married the bank manager, she dragged you to a house in Dalkey once owned by Roger Moore. It was ugly, flat-roofed, but we were learning that wealth and beauty don't marry. Beauty was not the point. The point was an empty swimming pool and the whole house haunted by chlorine. You were given a TV room, a subterranean lozenge where I pictured 100 monkeys chained to typewriters writing the next James Bond. As a gift, it was tundric in scope. At your mother's fancy party, we drank all the drink ends, then went downstairs and watched MTV. I thought the next logical step would be to kiss you, but then I was puking in a bucket in your room. When your mum came in to shout at me, the best revenge I could think of for the chlorine, the school move, the cuts all over your arms, was to shout she was a fucking poisoner and that she had poisoned me, just like she'd poisoned you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Well, we're really roaring tonight. We're now going to go back to Emilie, who's going to read some more poems from her Mslexia pamphlet. Emilie.
Thanks, Neil. So I'm going to start the second set of readings with a poem called Diagnosis. The event I describe took place on New Year's Eve in 1994. Diagnosis. The patient's jaw is detached. Note how her words have disconnected from one another. Wads of sound stuck around her teeth, soldering the back of the throat. Did this disarticulation happen while eating, laughing, or during a dental procedure? The medics examine her lower jaw, inquire whether it is all in her head. They may do an X-ray to gauge the gap between her skull base and temporomandibular joint. That is to say, the map of her voice and the silence it must inhabit. They may ask whether it happened at New Year's when she was 16. Had her brother wanted to go out with friends? Had her father not liked that? Maybe they will ask how he reacted when her brother dared, at last, to answer back. Was he pushed? Did something in him finally snap? Did he call her father a fucking dick? Medics may ask if this was the comment that became the trigger that swung the fist again and again into her brother, then round into her face when she tried to pry him loose. They may attempt manual reduction, where the jawbone is gently moved back into place. They gently push the jaw back to where it belongs. It all happens so very gently, and the words should flow back as if they had always been there, as if words could ever rectify the crossbite of his moods. A dislocated jaw is an emergency. Medics can treat it with reduction if they are able to do it right away. That is, if she goes to see one. She may decide not to, may worry about the consequences. She may be unable to speak to anyone about the incidents on New Year's Eve. Besides, a medic may agree it is not always possible to prevent dislocation. The patient may not be able to avoid all the situations in which it can happen, such as a car accident or her father losing it. Sometimes it takes months to heal. Sometimes it clicks back in place. Sometimes it stays like that for years. Sometimes years can transfigure the moment that wakes her still. Her father, his hand, her face. My father came to England in the summer of 1968 to visit his pen pal. And 3 weeks into his trip, the Soviet army invaded Czechoslovakia, and he didn't go home for 12 years. This next poem I'm going to read is called Leaving the Dock at Ostend, July 1968. My father stands at the bathroom mirror, sees an old man reflecting, immutable to himself, though his hair these days, thinning and white, is mostly unrestrained. He rolls some Old Spice into the flabby forest of the underarm, scrubs a diminishing row of teeth, scrubs them sideways, left to right. He stares into an unyielding face. It stares back, pulls no punches, calls a spade a spade. He cannot waver in this liminal space between body and self, finds himself committing small acts of regret. He wants to recall other faces and thinks his way back to the deck, casts his mind's net out into the grey matter of the sea. For a moment, he is 18 again, his future gold-rimmed. Handsome, side-burned, blue-eyed, he anchors the horizon. The boat edges from the dock. A surge now separates him from home, and a moan from somewhere deep within the body of the ship sounds in his chest. It tugs further west, and for a moment he sees his parents on the farm, paying their dues threefold to a state brought to its knees by those commie bastards. The gulls bring him back, screaming into the sky's blank canvas. He'll catch sight of England soon, with its rock and roll and salt-white cliffs. His heart swells. If only the clock would set itself back to this time, chime before every misstep. Turn left at the Crown, not right. Don't go to the dance that night. Don't fall for the trainee teacher. Start again. But our history's written. The words are on the wall. Soviet tanks sit poised like puppets, waiting for a hand signal to roll into the fatherland. He hums a tune he's heard on Radio Free Europe. It won't be long yet. Thinks of small luxuries he will collect, an English girl he will charm. The mirror holds his eyes glaze until his thoughts break on its surface, scattering like birds. My father and I played violin together for years, and he taught me to play, and he made sure I practiced, and he was so proud of my playing. And I'm going to end my reading with a poem called Ostinato in Something Minor. I find my violin wasting in felt line coughing quiet, dreaming of rich, unplayed chords. Rosin crumbles at my touch, makes ash of our music, now grainy between my fingers. My bow a slack mess of untamed hair. Bach's notes lie scattered, some I think might be missing. It's a puzzle. Hard to imagine a resolution to these patterns that keep repeating. But just imagine, Dad, if I could restring, piece together harmonies, how they might tune into your register, disrupt whichever progression is at play. I was your daughter. I was your daughter should have been the refrain. Thank you.
Thank you, Emilie, for that powerful reading. We're now going to hear from Clare Pollard, her second set. There.
Hey. So these are more about my life over the last, it's 8 years since my last book came out. And during that time, of course, well, I've been a mother of 2 primary school age children, toddlers when it started, but also the lockdown happened. And so I've written quite a lot of poems about domestic stuff because I've been immersed in the domestic, and then I think everyone was forced to live very domestic lives during lockdown, which was quite interesting. And I've always loved poets like Sylvia Plath, who I mentioned earlier, who can take the domestic, like cooking a roast dinner or picking daffodils or accidentally chopping a finger in the kitchen and make a poem out of that. So I'm going to read some of these more domestic poems now. And I'm going to start with a lockdown poem. So this is called Pollen. The medium death chose this time was love. Kindness, or what we thought was kindness, was now harm. And it was best if we just locked ourselves away and didn't show we cared, and hardly lived in weeks, which were our work. One week, though, I recall, the pollen came, piled in our street like snow, or no, like baby hair. I saw a boy that stroked its fur, how on their walk girls kicked at it, its carriage on the air from home to home, over fences, yards, the apple blossom, in through kitchen windows to where we stared at screens on makeshift desks, its waver on warm currents of my breath, how my eyes streamed with tears. Tell me that you noticed. And did you close the window too, uncertain now what you were meant to do with all that tenderness? And I'm now going to read the one that follows it in the book, which is about knit combing, something I think hasn't been written about enough. My daughter's class, it was just endemic for a year, and we had to just knit comb the whole family after every bath pretty much for the whole year, which was horrifying. Sorry if that's too much information. Luckily, it seems to have blown over for now. But while I was wondering how to write a poem about this, I read in the paper that they'd found the earliest known sentence in the earliest alphabet, and it was actually found inscribed on a 4,000-year-old comb, and the line was, "May this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard." So I was very interested in this idea that what I was doing is something mothers have done, families have done since the very beginning of like human civilization. And also that human society and civilization has always been sort of premised on this othering, this violence, this division, I suppose, between humanity and nature, where we sort of try and set it at a distance and pretend it's nothing to do with us. So this is called the head louse. Mark this knit, gritty little shit. Who can respect a faint speck? Don't they know they're not wanted? Irritating as fuck, ash flecks burning for juice. Who can we hate if not them? I inculcate the killer instinct. Think of how they pierce defences, make of friendly gestures a smuggler's route, pervert our hospitality. In dark, lice tap my daughter's head, tiny unsettling thoughts. They scratch to be let in, faceless succubi. I scarify my children's skulls, their golden shores of hair, dredge up dust bunnies, scaly bodies small as not at all. Obligate parasite, are we obliged to host? Host what? Dirt, motes of bloodthirst. Their leap of faith is not my leap. An infestation tests compassion. A Buddhist might escort each louse to a steep-sided bowl, transpose those sentient seeds, but where, loose them where, except in hair. Oh, jiggling crumbs, I crush them flick, so what? Wouldn't a mother chimp? I'm only grooming fondly, no tsunami, not a monster before whom crowds scatter. Your perspective's out of kilter, they're too minuscule to matter. Comb through damp hair, crown to tips. It smells of sulphurous pits, but the solution leaves things manageable. Clean. A 15-minute wait. Nymphs suffocate, and now it's late. What brushes me at midnight finally as a web? What trembles there? If I'm a giantess, they're Jack. The grit outwits me still, relentless irritant. What ominous thing ticks in my hair? A jumping pulse. The haunted house is me, and it's the speckled ghost. All winter I will claw at us and call it care. From where I am, it is. I'm going to try a new one I haven't, again, read out to an audience before, called Pothos, I think. H word from the same root as pathos or pathos, pity, pathetic. That's the trouble with being very bad at pronunciation. Sometimes I'm a real collector of words and I love to put a juicy word in a poem and then I don't know how to say it. Anyway, this one's for my mum, who I think is watching this on YouTube, because it's about my son and him being in a school play. And this was one year, one of the highlights of my year was I went to, well, not a school play, even smaller than that, a school assembly. And he was about 9, and they were doing ancient Greek civilization or something. And he was Alexander the Great. And he did this amazing solo, and I totally wasn't expecting it at all. And it was really just a very, very happy moment to see him do this incredible performance. But I'd also been reading, of course, I'm really into my classics and stuff. I'd also been reading just that month, one of those serendipitous coincidences about Alexander the Great. So this is the poem where those two realities blur. Alexander in Egypt, in his buffeted tent, reads his much-loved copy of the Iliad, the one he keeps beneath his pillow as dark tugs pegs, sand pressed in prints on the rug, his tongue mint-flavoured from tea, rough-tongued camels gargling thickly, as my son, in his school hall in assembly, in Adidas grey marl pants, long-sleeved T-shirt, sheet loosely pinned for a toga, bearing the cardboard sign Alexander the Great, his long curls still notionally blonde, beautiful in that way boys are at their beginning, voice unbroken, throws his throat back, almost arrogant, sings, I wanted more, more, more. And we whoop as Alexander thinks of Persia, gold and alabaster, the governor dragged to death from a cart in Gaza, because it reminded him of the passage about Hector, though it felt strangely unpoetic in the doing, as if no gods were watching. And my son wants to see the world, as do the children of Gaza, who my son and I speak little of, though that violence is an ambience. But Alexander wants to talk. He's lonely and wonders aloud to Ptolemy if the world might not be big enough, that he might run out of territory, though he surely knows the borders that will stop him are temporal and not spatial, that he won't reach the world's edge spoken of by Aristotle, beyond the Hindu Kush, where white mist spills into abyss, but a mosquito's tiny vengeance will open an inferno, a feverish ledge to end his petty empire of days at 32. Total defeat. And I know I mustn't pity him, and we can't pity everyone, but he's my son. Okay. And I'm going to finish with a short one. I've got a sequence. Another thing I got into during lockdown, so it's a sort of lockdown-ish set of poems, is cocktails. I got really into making cocktails, and you'll find them cropping up throughout this this book. You already had a martini with Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, but I've got a sequence called Cocktail List, which is sort of self-portrait in some of the cocktails I've drunk during my life. And I'm going to finish with this one, which is called Negroni, as I've got one in my hand. Cheers to everyone. After my child was born, it was the first drink I wanted. I had the 3 bottles lined up in my kitchen, near the baby's bottles, sterilizer and teats. Adulthood in a glass. A bitter release, like the relief you imagine death to be, except if you're dead, of course, you can't feel relief. It was something for me, when I had my breath back for my own. Equal parts gin, Italian vermouth, and Campari, the colour of insects crushed under your nails, of a birthing pool. Sometimes I feel my eyes in my sockets. The blood slips through its slim tubes. The heart clench, unasked. I heard the baby breathe in a basket, in little white things, as I let that red strobe through me, an aperitivo to wet my nerve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. And now, final treat will be the second set from Jessica Traynor.
I'm really delighted, actually, because both Emilie and Claire have read the poems that I really wanted them to read, and we didn't even discuss it in advance, so it's really gorgeous to hear them. I'm going to read 4 short ones for my second set, starting off with another poem based on a slightly true story, or as true as things need to be for poetic purposes. The drunk psychotherapist dooms you at the party. Oh, borderlines are the worst, she says. They drag everyone down with them. I think of Girl Interrupted, where Winona, that is you, was sectioned just for staying in bed too late, and I think, how can you drag me down when you're the one who left me behind? The therapist is swirling the dregs of her beer in its hand-warmed bottle and talking about manipulation, the long, empty barrow of your need. I'm picturing a grave packed full of the tat you used to lift from Topshop for me, sweet-coloured bracelets and tubs of black eyeshadow I couldn't afford. The psychotherapist gives me a measured look, the one she reserves for her patients, and says, they always kill themselves in the end. There are 2 sequences in this book called Movie Night with Lydia, and in them we watched together Tim Burton's 1992 movie Batman Returns, and in the second one we watch Beetlejuice. And I'm just going to read a short poem from this sequence, which is based on the moment in Beetlejuice at the end of the movie where Harry Belafonte's Jump in the Line plays and Lydia Deetz levitates. Jump in the line. Here in the group, we've all been assigned new personalities. Mine is goth who dances to Harry Belafonte because it's 1988 and we don't have manic pixie dream girls yet. I still can't see my friends, a quirk of vision. I tell the doctor, it's not really like they're invisible, it's more like they're not actually there. And she says, the reason we left Sad Girl Club is that people don't want to spend time with sad girls. After the dinner party, it's my big scene, the one that shows I'm happy. I hope all my friends will be there to lift me. It's very hot in this harness, but if you just wait, I will levitate. It's always interesting when you start doing readings from a new book, trying to kind of map your roots throughout the book. And in the readings that I've given so far, I've focused very much on the Lydia aspect of the book. But there's also a lot of tarot card stuff in the collection, including the sequence that gives the book its title, this new Arcana that I have kind of imagined a continuation of the major Arcana. But I also have reflections on existing tarot cards. And while I was writing this book, kind of over the course of lockdown, like I'm fascinated by the tarot. I don't believe that they're magic cards that tell the future, but I do believe that they're very good tools for self-reflection and also for exploring things like confirmation bias. You know, if you ask this deck of cards a question and you choose an answer, why did you want that answer, and what does it mean that that's the answer that you took from these symbols that have been gathered together from, you know, hundreds of years and lots of different kinds of esoteric ideas and imagery. So I had a lot of fun over the course of lockdown just doing these readings for myself and trying to write something based on the results, of which there's a long tradition. There are a lot of tarot card poems out there, but I also thought they were very good. I found them very good for writing kind of writing the angrier stuff and the darker stuff. And this particular poem, I'm going to read 2 poems at the end. My penultimate one now is a kind of a failed love poem that implodes a little bit, and then I have a slightly happier one to finish off with. So this is King of Wands reversed. The thought struck me, after all this time, why not write you a love poem? So I turned you upside down and shook until all the adders you'd hidden up your sleeves hit the ground and coiled away. I'm still shaking, but the nothing that falls out now looks like grief. If you could hear me, I'd ask you to take off your clothes and stand very close to me. Be quiet, though. Your words are useless, even the ones I imagine are insults. I can't look inside you, but when I look inside me, every organ's scorched clean. I wanted the honesty of your body. I wanted to interrogate it with my own. Here are your snakes. Here is your love poem. And at the end of the book, I did want to kind of write something that was maybe a little bit more positive or loving or less angry, perhaps, than some of the work that had gone beforehand. So I tried to write a love poem, but as kind of fits the themes and atmosphere of the book, a load of dead people managed to sneak into it. So anyway, they're all in here on Halloween. Love, earlier I thought the dead were playing tricks on us, when in my rush to reach you, I fell up our stairs, bruised ogham lines across my shins. But in our bedroom, I know we're playing tricks on them. Open in me the eye that shows me forgotten things. Indigo fog over Mountjoy Square, the yellow of a nighttime train station, the red, airborne shape of a slap I once felt a woman give me 7 leagues away. I offer it back to you, dead billions in your sleeping rose, the open lens, the wash of it, the sea's Caesarean fold where riptides meet. What does the cell know as it swims in the petri dish? I know points of light. I know laughter. My flesh and my closest flesh are laughing at you still. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And before we all come together, I should remind everyone that the books have just been published last week. And if you want to buy them, just scroll down on the YouTube page and there'll be little links there you can click to buy them direct from Bloodaxe, which of course we'd greatly appreciate. And we're now going to come together for a discussion. So can everyone turn on their screens and unmute themselves?
Here we are.
Are we all together? I'll just change my view. Gallery, right. Well, that was a stunning reading by all of you. It's quite superb. I mean, wow, rare. Jessica, you mentioned anger at the end, and I was interested in all your readings about anger and controlling anger in relation to what you write about. And I was wondering whether you might want to say sort of how you deal with that anger when you're writing about it, but not wanting to be over angry. How do you balance the anger?
I mean, I think in a way it's part of the craft of living, channeling our anger in certain different ways. But I do find with my own work, I remember once meeting a poet who was not a very charming or friendly person in life, but the work that they wrote was very charming and friendly. And I thought to myself, I'd like to be the opposite of that. I would like to leave my bad self on the page and take my good self out into the universe. And so I think poetry for me for a long time has been a way of kind of channeling those things which we just don't have space for in day-to-day life. There isn't a space often for anger, there isn't a space for grief. And Claire, I wrote down your definition of Negroni as adulthood in a glass there. And I was just thinking about, because Negronis are such a, like they're one of those you love it or hate it cocktails. But they absolutely do evoke that kind of complexity and that bitterness in a way. Like it's a lot of fun, but there's a bitterness there too. So I think that probably answers your question, Neil, with maybe a question for Claire on that idea of I love the contrasts in that poem between the kind of the bitterness of this cocktail and the kind of purity of the baby and those spaces colliding.
I love your description too. I hope that I'm that person too. I try to be jolly in everyday life, and people don't necessarily expect it. People often say my poetry sounds very angry, and I do not think of myself as an angry person, except occasionally if you get me on the subject of politics, which is not usually what my poems are about. But there's something about the control of poetry, isn't there, and the intensity of it that I think when you work at it, and the more you work at it, the sort of angry it seems to sound when you distill it. I don't know.
Yeah, Emily, your dislocated jaw poem, I mean, that uses a kind of clinical approach, doesn't it, to try and contain a really frightening poem about an experience.
Yeah. Oh, that one, it just, yeah, the medium of the doctor, that came very naturally to me. I think it helped to sort of distance myself a little bit from, from what happened, and to have it in that third person, it wasn't direct speech. I think that helped a lot, and it felt like a very natural way in which to write that particular poem. Always knew that was going to be an important one for me to write, and it has a different tone, I think, to a lot of the poems in my sequence. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think that detachment really helped for me
Yeah,
there.
because it was also a difficult poem for you to read, I noticed.
Mm,
Mm.
yes, I think they're all quite hard. I've had to
Well,
practice
what was
them all.
surprising is how little anger there was in your, like, I would say me and Jessica sounded much more angry, but you've got much more to be angry about in a way. I did feel there was
Just, well, there's more grief really than
this,
anger, I think.
yeah, and a lot of empathy actually for your father. So,
Yeah, I think anger's never been the feeling really. It's always just been how to manage the sort of, yeah, the grief really.
Mm. All your books are also to do with memorializing in some way or other, aren't they? I wonder whether you might like to speak to that idea.
sorry, me.
Yeah, I mean, in your case, it's memorializing the poets, a number of them that people haven't even heard of, and some of them, your book actually introduces them to that they might not have come across at all.
Yeah, it started with me writing this long poem that finishes the book, which is hard to extract from, but basically it's called Lives of the Female Poets. And I was just, I think I was often told, I did English literature at university, and I was often told, well, there were no female poets. They they weren't literate, they were too busy churning up babies, they just didn't exist. And if they did, they weren't terribly good. But actually, once you start to look at it, it's absolute nonsense. There's always been female poets. Like the first poet ever was a female poet. The first sonnet sequence in English was written by a female poet, Anne Locke, just for another example. But historically, LEL was known as the female Byron at the time. She was incredibly well known. But for lots of reasons, these women have been, their work's just been lost. It's not been preserved. It's been destroyed. They've been branded as sort of prostitutes or immoral for being women writers. They've not been included in anthologies. They've not been, the critics of the time have torn them apart or dismissed them. They've only been remembered as jokes or as muses or as, and there's just so many women's work, so much women's work has been lost to us over the years, but there have always been lots of female poets. So I guess that was where the book came from, although I couldn't resist throwing in a few poems about well-known female poets as well.
I have to thank you yeah, your subject matter, because I went down some wonderful rabbit holes whilst
Good.
reading your book. Yeah, in particular Anne Locke. I mean, it's just wonderful.
What about you two then, memorializing in your work?
I mean, for me, I suppose it's kind of a stage of life thing. I kind of even before the kind of the particular tragedy at the heart of the book, I had found myself just readdressing the pop culture that I valued a lot, that meant a lot to me when I was growing up. And a lot of that, in a much less serious way than what you were talking about, Claire, was about the fact that all of that was incredibly dismissed. The things that I liked, the kind of witchy stuff, the astrology stuff, it was all just silly. And there's a part of me that apologizes for it now, even. Whereas I do find a lot of these kind of, things like, you know, things like astrology, tarot cards, divination. There's a reason why we turn to these things. And it's the same reason that people turn to religion. And I'm not dismissing religion or, I'm not creating a hierarchy there. But, it is the need for some sort of certainty beyond the self, which we all yearn for and all feel more of a pull towards at various different times in our lives. And I think, in terms of even my own stage of life and then also the world that we're living in, which none of us, I think, could have imagined you know, in our worst nightmares maybe 10 years ago, in terms of political turmoil, genocide, international violence, all of these kind of things coming hot off the heels of a pandemic. I mean, what a turbulent time to be alive. So I was very kind of keen to not only memorialize my friend, but also to kind of grab on to the things that had been a bit of a life raft for me in earlier times and kind of pull them into the present and try and take them, you know, not take them seriously in terms of this is how we should all be running our lives, but give them their dues as, you know, kind of attempts to communicate beyond the self that are valuable, I suppose, in a way. But yeah, so I think that would be my attempt to kind of reclaim some of that stuff. Um, but Emilie, I was kind of thinking about your approach in your book as well, and just to kind of expand on what Claire said, the kind of the scope and empathy of the project, I think, is what really kind of brought me up short, you know, that there is so much. And yes, I don't think I did see it as an angry book. I think I saw it as a book full of, it was a heartbroken book and a book full of love.
Yeah.
And the kind of the generosity of it, particularly around the poems around music. And that poem that you read, the Ostend poem, which is towards the end, and just this, yes, leaving the dock at Ostend, July 1968, just the kind of the generosity of the spooling back towards a time, or the seeking of it, a specific time where the crisis began, in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think it was almost a form of I don't want to say self-therapy, but just trying to understand, you know, what shaped the man, and so I did a lot of uh yeah, just trying to sort of put myself in his shoes a lot. In fact, that was pretty much what I was trying to do throughout the writing of these poems. Just always trying to imagine, well, what was he feeling at this time? You know, what was he going through? And, you know, what could have been so bad that it translated into, you know, some of the things that happened. And even, you know, in spite of some of those, you know, awful events um and I have to say, you know, it wasn't um you know, what's the word I'm trying to think of? It was the fear that was routine, not the violence. So, you know, yeah, I suppose what I'm trying to say is I was just trying to always put myself in his shoes and just trying to understand, really. It was a process of just understanding, just trying to understand. But yeah.
Ask you about the fairy tales, Emily, because that's another form, often of women's stories and women's literature that's been passed down. I mean, that's another thing that's happened to a lot of women's literature is it's anonymous or misattributed or it's anonymous. But I was interested in the sort of Eastern European fairy tales and the wolf I noticed popping up a bit. I wondered if you could talk a bit about that, or if there's
Yes, there's not enough of that, I think, in the pamphlet. I mean, it's really, you know, there are only so many poems you can squeeze into a pamphlet, and I'm very keen to actually expand that particular angle because there's so much more. There is such a richness to Czech culture, and the cartoons and the fairy tales are just sublime. Um, I had a wonderful time actually when I was researching some of the poems which didn't make it into the pamphlet, but I went back and I was watching sort of 1950s Czech sort of puppeteers and marionettes and all these wonderful, very rich sort of folkloric tales that are unique to Czechoslovakia. And yeah, there's such a richness here, and this book doesn't do credit, you know, it doesn't do justice to that aspect of Czech culture, and I would like to expand on that at some point. But yes, you know, it does pop up a little bit in a few of the poems. It felt like a very sort of apt metaphor, you know, that sort of slightly sinister, foreboding presence of a wolf. You know, you're never quite sure, you know, if you're safe or you're not. So I was trying to convey that.
farming, often wolves, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah.
Emily, I know you've worked in some pretty scary places in overseas development, and I was wondering whether that was an area you thought of actually responding to in your work.
Separate to the topic, you
Yeah.
mean?
Mm.
Absolutely. In fact, I have written quite extensively about my times in Afghanistan, and that's also a project in waiting,
Mm.
which at some point, and I need to do it quickly because the memories are fading. But luckily, I have boxes filled with notepads from various meetings with tribal elders in various mountain villages, and just yeah, lots and lots of notepads with notes. So I will absolutely do something with that, all of that at some point.
Mm. Well,
Um,
I hope you'll rejoin us later with that
I
work.
I hope so. Um, Jess, actually, I have a question for you. Sorry, I'm taking up a lot of the sound wave, but I was wondering. I was really interested with the Tim Burton presence in your poems, and I was wondering how his aesthetics, the gothic whimsy and the dark humor and the estranged outsider. How did that allow you to express? Something that straightforward realism might not have.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I had started to write kind of Tim Burton response poems again kind of before the loss of my friend. And I think I kind of got drawn back to them because they were such, I got to the stage where I realized they'd been such a big presence in my childhood. I kind of grew up in a time, I suppose, in the 90s where people didn't really pay much attention to parental guidance on
Yeah.
my parents are going to kill me now. But I remember when I was 7 years old, the family all going to see Tim Burton's Batman Returns in the
Oh,
little cinema. Because I was just, my dad had come home with a little cutting of Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman, and the whole family were so excited about going to see this. And the violence in these movies is actually quite extreme. And now, weirdly, Beetlejuice, which I think is even grimmer in places, is only a PG, I think. But Batman Returns was a 15, so I definitely should have not have been in seeing it as a 7-year-old. But I think I was really interested in looking at the kind of the gender politics in particular of these movies because I like Tim Burton now as an adult, but I don't love him the way I would have loved him as a child. And I think there was something quite seductive about that whimsicality for children, but paired with, I think, a really kind of I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, just his attitude towards women gives me the ick. There's very much a kind of a Madonna whore thing going on, which I think he would be shocked to hear himself. But I see it in those movies. Their women are either kind of powerful and doomed to die, or pure and doomed to die. And, there's very little positive agency given. Now, look, he's working within the frameworks of certain kinds of stories, so that's kind of fair enough. But I just in the wake of what happened to my friend and she had a very long struggle with mental health issues, and she was very vocal about it, and she was quite a public advocate for mental health resources in Ireland. But I did look back and think, what kind of a model for our lives had we bought into? And I was really interested in kind of exploring that, while also kind of acknowledging the fact that there was something kind of gorgeous and lovely about that time in our lives and all of the possibility and potential, and how much we enjoyed having a mode within which to model ourselves as people who felt a little bit different, maybe from the people who surrounded us. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. And Claire, actually, I wanted to bounce it on to a question for you. I love the way in the book that you have, and you were talking about the two halves of the book, the half that's about these kind of historical female poets and then, you know, the life of the contemporary female poet. But one of the choices that I love that you've made is that they're all interspersed. You know, I think you could have made the choice to have like one half kind of very physically, kind of a very binary approach. But I love the way that the poems are threaded throughout each other so that, you know, we as the readers are giving them the same weight. Because I just think that's really important. I think it's great to reclaim people who are gone, but never at the cost of people who are actually writing now, because otherwise we're actually, I suppose, contributing to the erasure of our own
Yeah.
generation, you know? So
Yeah.
I'm very glad that your cocktail poems are right there in the middle between block sonnets. But will you talk a little bit about that? Was that something that you thought about when you were putting the book together?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, although I described it as a book of two halves, it is a bit more complicated than that. And sometimes I've just taken, you know, a first line or an epigram or an image from another poet, or sometimes it's about me, but I'm talking to the poet, or, you know, so I'm in conversation with these poets throughout. And it's actually, that's what I wanted it to feel like. It's like a conversation. There used to be a great, I mean, there is a great play by Carol Churchill called Top Girls, I think, which I used to be a dramatist, absolutely loved it, where all these famous women were in conversation at a table. So I guess I was sort of thinking of it like that, this book where we're all sort of chatting to each other, maybe, or drinking martinis with each other. And in another poem, I'm getting drunk with Elizabeth Bishop in a beautiful house in Brazil with her toucan, who then sadly dies. Yeah, I like that idea that we were all sort of in conversation within the pages of the book.
A very unserious question for you. What happened to the toucan? I was looking at it again earlier and I wanted to know what happened to the
It was,
toucan.
they think it was accidentally poisoned at a party, but they don't.
You see, this is it. I was thinking, you know, was it like, did the poor toucan drink her whiskey by accident?
It's possible, isn't it? It's possible. I like though, Jessica, throwing it back at you. You've got quite a few poems that are about what it is to be a female poet. I really enjoyed Bog Virgin very much. I thought it was very fun. But also I loved your response to Yeats, which you didn't really say, but you have a response. So you're responding to those big male Irish poets, I suppose, as well, and inserting yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big legacy. And I think the only thing to do with those the odd time is poke a little bit of fun. And I actually the Bog Virgin, the shocking, you know, you should write from your cunt because Paddy Kavanagh never did. That is something a now deceased older male Irish poet said to me over a bowl of chowder in a restaurant. And I've been trying to write a poem about it for about 15 years. So it finally made its way. I mean, I think he thought he was giving me good advice, but I also think he was trying to shock the poor American tourists who had sat down at the next table and thought that it was a girl with her granddad. And he made this very loud pronouncement in the restaurant. And I just thought, I will get this into a poem at some stage, you know? And I think that's what it's like to be a female poet sometimes. I think that's a perfect microcosm of the experience. But Yeats, I think in every one of my collections, I have a little dig at Yeats. And obviously, I am a very big fan of, I mean, Yeats was such a huge formative presence. You know, growing up, we did Yeats in school, and then I studied Yeats in university, and we all take Yeats very seriously. So sometimes we have to take him a little bit less seriously for a few minutes. Yeah, so that's an Easter egg for anybody who cares to look back over the last few collections, find the little Yeats dig that's hidden in there somewhere. Yeah. But,
Claire, can I ask you about your fiction? You've won a prize for your innovative fiction, and this is a new thing in your writing, which you've developed for the last few years, between collections in a sense. And I was wondering what the connections are between your poetry and your fiction. Did your poetry help you write the fiction because of the use of metaphor and all those kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always just wanted to be a writer, and I think poetry just came easiest to me of the forms. I've always been able to work well at the level of the line, even when I was 16, 17, I guess, when you first published me, Neil. When I wrote my first book. So I've always but I've always wanted to be, I mean, if you'd asked me when I was 6, I would have said I wanted to be a novelist when I was older. And I wrote a lot of novels in my 20s that didn't get published. I wrote a play that did get put on at the Royal Court. So I've always worked across lots of genres. But I finally cracked it. I finally got some novels published, which I have to say does mean slightly more money.
It means also you don't get stuck on
Sorry
one
to
thing.
tell everyone.
You don't get writer's block if you've got other genres you can move between.
I think for me, I actually find it much for poetry. I can go 6 months and not write a poem. I have to wait for the muse to strike me. It's not something where I sit at a desk and think I'm going to write a poem. I never has been. And every poem, you've got to have a new idea. There's like really quite a lot of ideas for a full collection of poetry. Whereas a novel, once I've got an idea, I can just sit. It's like a job. I can just sit down and, I know I'll write 2,000 words a day when I'm in the zone. So it's a very different sort of writing for me. And it's much more, it's much easier to sort of make a career out of it in that sense. I can produce it at volume. In a way, poems, I'm afraid, just, and this collection took me 8 years, but these are really, I don't throw many away. So these are pretty much all the poems I wrote in like 8 years,
Do you get the same sort of butterfly effect in your tummy with writing prose that you do with the? Well, I don't know. I'm just assuming because that's how I feel when I'm writing poems.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I really love it. It's an absolute delight. Especially, I've just got a 2-book deal for children's books, and writing children's books is just so much fun. I can't tell you. I'm just like giggling to myself at the typewriter the whole time. Really, really enjoyable. No offense to poetry. But poetry will always be at the centre of my writing life. And I think some things I'm very good at as a novelist because I was a poet first. Obviously, image making is one of them, but also form. I think I'm very interested in form and structure, and now I've got into it. Like my last adult novel, both my adult novels. The first one, Delphi. Every chapter heading is a sort of form of prophecy, a different form of prophecy. And the next one, every chapter heading is the name of a fairy tale. So, I was very interested in the sort of setting up formal rules for myself in a novel and playing with that, which is probably why I got the Tadeusz Brudecki Prize, which was for sort of experimental hybrid fiction. The one poems I would say were influenced by my prose writing in Lives of the Female Poets are, between my 2 adult novels, I wrote another novel that I had to abandon because my publishers showed no interest in it at all, which is about an AI novelist. They just said, "Oh, AI, it's over before it's begun. By the time we publish it, it'll be too late, etc., etc." But it did have all these riffs on Emily Bronte in it, and a resourceful woman that I am, I've sort of repurposed them as prose poems in this book. So so they're sort of more hybridy things, I suppose. But nothing ever gets wasted in my laptop. It'll find its genre in the end, sort of thing.
I was just going to say that was one of my favourite pieces of writing in your collection on Emily Bronte, age 6.
Just thank you very much.
Absolutely exquisitely written. I could read that again and again. It's just so lovely.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank you for taking part in this reading tonight. We've got to let our people watching go off and get their suppers now, and you'll no doubt want to get back to your cocktails. So thank you, all 3 of you. I think it's been a marvelous reading, marvelous conversation between you. So many connections between your work. It's really great. One of the best. So thank you very much. Thank you for everyone for watching, and do watch out for the information about our next event, which will be October the 20th. Kit Bright, Salima Hill, and Menna Elfin. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Neil.